qui disent, who say, I think about it like that. Jean-Claude, we can interview him from the beginning anyway. I'm clicking for the live broadcast, huh? Attention, come on. I'm going to tell you why. Is it saved? There you go. There. It's well here. Second show, 1 hour Supramental show. And so today's topic is a topic that is brought up by the, so can we say supramental teaching? Well, it's a novelty. That is to say that thoughts come from elsewhere and then, well, elsewhere, but where? So the subject of the show is, where do we think? So with us, Richard, Sonia, Christian for the moment. And so in the description of the YouTube live, well, there is a book. And so as soon as we say that we exchange and you intervene, you click on the link and you arrive immediately live on the show with us. There you go. And from where our thoughts come from? Well, start by, well, I'll show you a drawing taken from a comic book. It will change what we've done. There you go. It's taken from the Tintin comic book, and it turns out that in a somewhat special situation, well, there are thousands who hear two voices that give him opposite advice. It's the voice of a kind of 1,000 angels and nature who tells him to go in a direction that corresponds to Milou's situation, which is that, well, he follows Captain Nadok with Dumeski sinking from his bag, and he asks himself if I let fall or not. So, of course, his little dog angels tell him, no, 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 unfortunate alcohol. And his little demon dog tells him, but yes, it's really good, go ahead. So the tool, a little something, we would be a bit humorous here. Well, by chance, wouldn't we hear this kind of voice? Well, this debate, so I stop and welcome Jean-Luc. Jean-Luc, you turned off your microphone, but finally, yes, you all turned off your microphones. That's good, but on the subject, but where do our thoughts come from? If I may say so. What do you mean by that? But you, yes, because it's true that Christian, you're new to the show, so welcome to the newcomer, and go ahead. I'll take the...
It must be said that this story of thought that comes from elsewhere is that it is a big piece to swallow at the beginning. When you discover the supramental, it is the first, it is not something that we not learn, but everywhere. What it is a big piece, because a whole life, well, we think without thinking about it, if I may say so. And this thought, in fact, we identify with it what creates everything that what follows, that is to say, our personality, finally. Everything that flows, that I'm not going to list. So what is this thought? Well, it's necessary to focus on the fact that what's interesting is the image that you showed of Milou with the demon and the angel. It's that it's always a question of polarity. There's this side that's good, that's well done, that doesn't do that all our lives without realizing it, as long as you don't know about this story. In fact, all our lives, well, we're truculent, we're turbulent, it leads to guilt, it leads to regrets, it leads to, well, if I had known, I shouldn't have done that, or if I had known, I should have done that, because in principle, what happens is that you have the angel who arrives and suggests something to us, and then the demon who comes a quarter of an hour later, once we've done the thing, and who reproaches us for it, or vice versa. In fact, it's the same. Sometimes we can even wonder if it's not the same entity, since we'll have to talk about entities at some point. If it's not the same entity that plays a bit on both paintings, which teases us. But uh, behind that too, maybe, well, it's certainly in question of something much bigger. In fact, it's that well, we can define the elsewhere, but it's not there for nothing. It's perhaps because of a certain level to boost us up, to make us understand that there are things to develop in us, to annoy us. If we are here today, it is because at a given moment, each and every one of us, we were optimistic, but we experienced so much suffering, anger, that automatically we said to ourselves, but what's happening is not normal. And so that's where we were automatically put in contact with, well, like me, I come here today where I met other people, and then we started watching videos. And then we said to ourselves, but that's it. Finally, I'm talking about Bernard de Montreal and others, but especially Bernard de Montreal, obviously. That's it. That's at the beginning what I can say. We can continue, but I want to let them speak to others. Right? Yes, we're going to share the word. That's it. That's it. Thank you for this introduction, Christian. So indeed, yes, we are tossed between polarity. Finally, what I do is good, what I do is bad. And after, yeah, emotions that come with someone else wants to speak.
Direct.
Yes. So good evening, everyone. So it's true that what Christian just said is still quite complete, even if we didn't go, let's say, into extreme depth, but it encompasses quite a few pieces of information. It's interesting. What I saw in the thinking system, if we have to answer the question, at least me, how do I see the question, where our thoughts come from? It's certain that for a very long time, things like, okay, where do my thoughts come from? I was looking for where come from, where do these thoughts come from? And finally, when we start to ask the question, we realize that finally it comes from everywhere. I see the beautiful thought as a pilot system, a bit like a GPS. So we would be on the antenna, and then we would capture information, and this information would be transmitted by this bilog system, which is the system of thought. And finally, if we look closely at the thing, we realize that it comes from everywhere. So obviously, today I say it obviously that thought comes from elsewhere. It is not localized in specific places. It is broadcast. And then, well, there will be antennas that will manage to capture certain information that will then arrive in the system, and that will be translated into thought. So after that, whether it's negative, positive thoughts or not, well, that's another subject. But finally, sometimes even, I think, all the time in contact with things that belong to us or not. So if it comes from everywhere, so we can very well receive information from our authority that comes from neighbors, that comes from someone to meet in the street, and so on. And I think that the problem is there. It's that the trigger system is failing, namely that when we capture the information that comes to us, it translates into thought, this thought in general. If we are not able to look at it when it arrives, we will immediately do it in clear. So if I have to answer the question of where our thoughts come from, I thought such and such from elsewhere, or thought comes from elsewhere. Yes, today it's obviously simply on a system of experience of observation, finally, but it's still necessary to manage to distinguish it and have a real filtering mechanism that will allow you not to make it yours, not to make it yours, but it's the difficulty. It's is it that it comes from us, it doesn't come from us, so a transceiver receiver system, I see it that way. So that's what comes to me, at least. So thank you, Sergio. So I add my little grain of salt is that until now scientists were experimenting with the brain and deduced that, well, yes, if the brain is altered, thinking is also altered, banking proves that, well, proves that ideas are generated by our brain, but it can be explained just as well by the fact that whether our brain is like a radio receptor, well, indeed, if the radio is broken, yes, the thoughts are broken, but that's it. So, indeed, that's it. So, basically, it's just that, yes, the human brain, or most of its thoughts is more of a radio. It's a new concept that was brought by Supramental.
There's something that bothers me. I find it weird, which is that in fact, when you think about it, you realize that they're rather neutral, they're polarized, and what's polarized is our state. Depending on the state we're in, we're going to find ourselves polarized in one way or another with our tantayim, the emotion, and that at the base for a thought, it does. Indeed, it can come from elsewhere because it was designed somewhere. And this year, these are external thoughts that will form the egregore, and these thoughts that we can receive will be perceived not randomly, but depending on our vibration. That is to say, it's a bit like radio, as you were saying, not to will be engulfed in the antenna or not, and we will receive the radio as of let's say who receptacle, so we'll know if it comes from elsewhere or not from elsewhere, then where it comes from and how it remains in the form of memory. That is to say that, as Christian spoke, we have entities that will fix these ideas, these that is to say, they don't have any modifications. Why? Because it's our mind that promotes decryption and the restructuring of certain thoughts that come from within, some that therefore come from internal thoughts that are therefore external. And internal thoughts, inside thoughts, are thoughts that are not developed. That is to say, these are thoughts that will spontaneously lead us to act without having to think. That's what we do in general, whether it's eating, drinking, when you're thirsty, when you're hungry, when you run towards something, you don't think too much. That's when you're stopped, or when there's an obstacle, you start to think. And that's what these internal thoughts are going to generate at the level of our mind and make what we could call a kind of memory to which an object will be attached, to which it will be attached an action. And the and me, and who will remain after our death, and who could be fascinated by people who will pass and who will have a beautiful vibration as ours. What I see in the system for now, you'll come later. For example, okay, thank you, Jean-Luc. Richard, your image is frozen. I don't know if you have the sound. If you ever come here, okay, well, that's too bad. Well, that's too bad, but that's already the last one. So go ahead. If you come and intervene, it's curious, yeah. No, but there, I have nothing. I have nothing that has triggered me for now.
Finally, for the question of where it comes from and all that, everything I tell myself. So it's true that there's a story of discernment. Wait, I'm going to cut the video and put it back to see, maybe it'll come back. I don't know. I put it back on. I don't know if it's moving again. A bit like by elimination, at least in my progression, I actually heard this sentence, the thought, by the way. So what is this thing? And then, well, finally, by hearing several things with, how to say, a lot of, I like to say like broken views, in fact, of the human, because that's what we do a little bit when we look at all that a little bit. These are broken views. So, in fact, by elimination, before knowing that it could come from elsewhere, since it was brand new for me too, in a while, well, there are things that I noted like that, a little bit like several zones, thoughts that would come from material. That is to say, that I look at things, it will trigger thoughts for me. So I feel triggered by things of matter, invisible. Then after, when we see in the image of Milou with things on his shoulders, I will see a little bit of this side that we. So things that would bring me a bit of war in my head. So I say war because there is a polarity. So there is a fight. What a little bit is what or is what? No. Is it white? Is it black? Is it that? So so there we feel the polarity of the thing. So there, with other understandings, I would say easily it comes from the astral plane. And I don't know if it's not to listen or listen, but in any case, I'm aware that there is already a polarity. So at least that's already it. And then after, there are some who know Jean-Pierre Garnier Malet there, who with his story of the theory of doubling, which was interesting in any case, which brought new things too, or validations, or at least thoughtful subjects a little more, or to push a little further. There was this story of intuition and this famous thing of doing when it falls into my head, because after it goes to reflection, we spot in a certain way, because it goes back down to the computer of the brain, therefore studied by scientists, because you were saying a little bit of all the money, Claude. I forgot where they were for the moment, where some progress. And so this intuitive side suddenly became more interesting. So intuition, we can say it like something else, like thought that comes to us like that spontaneously without being inspired and without us feeling it. You are just a thought in relation to something that we look at in matter. So that's why I put 3 zones. And so through intuition, well, from there, that's where it became interesting, because through intuition, I told myself, so through this kind of thing, a little more neutral, I had the impression, I told myself afterwards, I'll have to manage to make discernment. So since I'll rather position myself in the invisible, earlier matter is matter, but here between what is polarized and what would rather be astral type and something that would come to me, which is something I have to do, it's recta, it's cash, it's really immediate. That's where I'm going to carry my outlook to make discernment little by little over time, because it's always easy to see when someone talks to us about it, but when it's us, it's always a little more delicate. And so there, I don't want to go further, but already by having heard it by Jean-Pierre Garnier, indeed Bernard, because I had heard it the first time at home, so I mentioned it there. But indeed, I'm going to head with this kind of thing more, and it will be all the easier to see. As soon as I'm torn, oh yes, that's true that there's polarity. So that's not what's to follow, but it's from this polar zone. And so after that, well, I move so I don't tell myself anything more. I don't feel particularly more connected. In any case, I don't use these terms. On the other hand, I had like finally possible, and then that it sends me in. It's been a while since I was sent to Caspi, I feel like, so I tell myself, well, it seems to be not too bad, maybe to follow that, but at the same time I don't need to tell myself I hear that, so I'm going to follow it. So really, I really have an approach that is not at all an approach that is actually very simple. I follow what I can't even say what comes to mind, but now I'm going to overheat there. I'm not going to be able to go any further for now. That's really what I can get out so far. So I'm following things. Basically, I'm summarizing all this by doing what needs to be done. And then I'll see later in how do you say, excuse me, I'll see in how do you say, in afterwards, there you go, debriefing, or afterwards, I'm going to, oh yeah, that sent me in that direction, and I see the influence he sent me, and I see where it started from, and there you go, by unraveling, there you go. Whereas, there you go, that's how it is. I'll stop there. Okay, and wait, just good evening, Pascal. I saw that you arrived, but I just wanted to, bounce back on what Richard just said, is that if I understood what you said, it's because your thoughts come to you, you
try to see them finally, to how to say, to take distance from one's thoughts. That's it.
It's an interesting part. I don't, it's what I find, it's what I, it's true that, in fact, after we often talk about hindsight, you can repeat your question. It's that at the moment, it's that if I understood correctly, at the moment when a thought comes, where, let's say that at the moment when a thought finally is received in your brain, well, there, you tell yourself that we know that's it. But in fact, I have the impression that it's like I was all in all the time in activity, which means that I don't even see her arriving. So I'm not particularly wary of it. That's why I was talking about debriefing in retrospect. So it's true that I don't even tell myself I'm being sent thoughts, since it's now become rarer. And that's what's interesting, is to talk to all of you, to everyone who wants, because in fact, I don't even have questions anymore. I don't ask myself questions here. What am I going to do tomorrow? Have I done this wrong? So really, I would say like that for fun, but after that, it might be postponements at the end of the thing or in a week, just as if I could say that I suffered my thoughts, but I could say that, but suffering is already a bit, it may seem negative, but I take what happens. And I tell myself that with experience, I don't really want to discourage with our direction. So I tell myself, well, I'm not taking these terms, but those who speak, well, those who can say, yes, I have a guide that follows me, would say, well, I have, at least I'm with a good guide, but I don't know if these are my terms, but it's to say that, yeah, I don't look at it particularly when it happens, since I tell myself, well, I have this to do, I do it. So there you go. I'm here, but I can't go any further there.
Unclog.
We're all here earlier. You're unwilling that there was, unless in the meantime, to furnish as long as he comes back. Maybe that one, you want to say something. It's via Christian who had raised his hand. Go ahead. Yeah, he's going to find us again. In fact, what I wanted to say is that it can complete a bit of what Jean-Luc said, and at the same time, what you said,
So Syndrex, it generally doesn't put us into action anymore. It puts us in a rather observational form, and their outsiders are the ones who will drive the movement, drive the action, an action of everyday life. The external thought, which is linked to action, is completely malleable. Namely, we can manipulate it, let's say, more or less as we please. And I find that super interesting, especially for difficulties that we may encounter in our lives during the recurring patterns and so on. Then, of course, I speak in the negative, but it can also be in the positive. If it's excessive, it can turn negative. But on the back, unlike and conversely, an inner thought that is almost borderline frozen. The we have difficulty in being able to interpret it finally, or if possible, possibly in the long term, manage to make it evolve. But when it arises, I really find it very different from outside thinking. Outside thinking, we can catch it up and then we can handle it. We can decide differently, whereas those that come from within are a little more nothing, let's say, whatever. So that's just what I wanted to add on the two systems of thoughts, a little bit of thought. Okay, thank you, Sonia. Wait, there you go. I had a little technical problem, so if I have a little technical problem, Sonia and Richard, you continue your line without me, and we know that. So that, there you go. So we have Pascal who joined us and who hasn't spoken yet. So you, the word, Pascal.
Sure. Hello? Pascal?
I think Jean-Luc, he had raised his fashion. Come and intervene, go ahead, take over. Spending a career is that the mind generates, it's a bit like if internal thought came out of the floor like that, in a shapeless way. And that our mind formed that allowed us to have difficulty knowing where it came from. And once it's formed, at that moment, it becomes an external thought that we can reject. And this manipulation allows us to realize that once the thought is formed, it is what we could call something fixed, something immoral, something indestructible, but something that will be able to go elsewhere. And what we need to see well is that for people who do what we call that, they do material style, may thought thinking without having to interpret them. And it's our mental interpretation that makes the thoughts stop. So if we don't want to be disturbed by thoughts, just let go and not interpret them, not look at them, not yet, not yet. They might think that inner thoughts come from a program that
Oozes into a form of paradise in our minds to act. So internal actions will push us to propel us towards something, towards an action where we will not need to rebalance our mandate to. That's what I could see.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Luc. Well, Pascal, who is Christian, did you want to? Yeah, I wanted to. Go ahead, complete 2 or 3 things, talk about my mind thinking at the beginning that I discovered. So the supramental, I was talking about it earlier. What makes you want to stop thinking about, at least I understood that there was therefore that my brain didn't think, but that it was a post transmitter receiver. So we think that thought is something we receive. I thought to myself, but therefore it comes from elsewhere, so I don't want it. I want to manage myself, so somewhere I want to say, well, maybe I'm the only one who has that in mind, but it's as if there were 3 modes of thought. I'm going to say, well, I use the same word for all this, although it has nothing to do with it, but there's the little
to stop this type of thought, it's to pull the thread and question one who thinks in our head in our place. If you are yourself to tell me who you are, go see elsewhere. That's how I manage. If I have a thought that I consider toxic that comes to mind, well, I question the one who loved him, the one who sent him to me, or rather, I question him. If I ask him, what do you want me? Why do you think you're telling me that? I forbid you from entering my brain. Go and take an interest in someone else. Well, and I think that it works much better against toxic thoughts than wanting to systematically oppose or saying stop or get lost. Well, like I did at the beginning. Then earlier you were told, Richard, talked about the Jean-Pierre Garnier Malet, because he's someone who brings through physics, quantum, since he's a specialist in his field, the notion of double. So he's someone who's I've listened to quite a few videos. I have books at home. Well, a lot of courses, well, it's part of ourselves that has been cut off. So he explains that I would have trouble explaining through quantum demonstration everything that is finally the whole theory. But the principle is that at the beginning we are one, and for a reason, then it would seem that we chose to come to experience matter. And at the time of experimentation of matter, this one is divided into two. So there is a part, the consciousness that has deposited on Earth. I will do that with my words. And another part, the mind that remained, I need a great systemic mind. And this second part is what is called double. And someone was talking, I don't know who, I think it's you, Richard, but I'm not sure. Talking about here, I'm being cut off. It's funny. At that time, talking about here, it's never come back. So it's because one of the second ways to receive information, because for me, the toxic thought that comes from entities is not real information, right? Real information is something that comes from double, as we talk about the last Malay or Bernard de Montreal or other people. But this double is therefore a part of the doubles of, it's another part, it's the other part of ourselves, which seeks to get in touch with us constantly. It's there for that, except that, and until the day we learn that thought comes from elsewhere, and that's when we can start eventually discussing with him, or at least trying to have contacts and information. And well, that's what I think. I'm often surprised by the answers that are powdery. So it's not spent, it's images that can come, it's memories that can come. So you have to be careful, because these images and these memories, what Richard described as intuition, indeed, it's intuitions, but it can come in different forms. Finally, I'm talking about my experience. And obviously, we have to question what's going on. What I'm doing wrong, the ankle, I twist the ankle. I do it. Why am I twisting the ankle? I fall from the ground. Why am I falling? So it may seem a bit strange to operate like that, but there is a new dialogue that is established with ourselves, in fact, since this double, in fact, it is us, it is the second part of ourselves there. And so that is the second part. And then thoughts. And I hope that there is a third one, that then maybe this third one, I'm wrong. I don't know yet, because it's something new for me. But frequently I have the perception of internal presence, but of a great internal presence. And if I was inhabited, not possessed, inhabited. Yeah. And so maybe it's double that comes around me and that I perceive, I don't know. But it's, and at that moment, there you go. And at that moment, I feel like I'm really capable and independent autonomy in my word, that my word does not come, is not the consequence of a memory or an obscure thought or a traumatic thought, finally, yeah, thoughts of entities. So at that moment, when I'm in contact with that, and I manage to then alone, that happens to me when I'm alone, because as soon as there are people around me, it gives off, surely I'm too captured by these three forms of, I call it three forms of thought. It may not be the right terminology, man. And especially since he's a scientist, that's what was always interesting. Besides, Bernard had said once that everything is not necessary on the supramental level. And that's what happens now.
Your microphone, Jean-Claude, yeah. Okay, go, Sonia, go on, go on.
Yeah. But I'm gonna let you speak. It's just bouncing back on sports. Regarding Malet, it's funny because it's certain that when I started to, aware of the double and so on, I did some research and I obviously came across Malet, but I never really understood his theory. In fact, it's sessions, it's conferences of 1 hour or 2 hours where he tries to bring this notion of double. She never spoke to me. I've never really grasped what it was about. So obviously, he is a scientist, so he put equations on a table, on a sheet to get an idea out of it. But I don't understand his notion of location. And but after finally, I mean, the notion of double driven by the supramental is much more accessible, let's say, even if it's not necessarily experimental right away, but it's much more appropriate than the theory of double quantum. Besides, I can, because it means quantum. We listen to a lot of things that are named by very modern terms, but I think we ignore the essence. I don't know what it means to double, but magnification. So there you go. So that's it. But it's for sure that, yes, it was said in the publicatory gentlemanly, but I don't know. It's like a very designed one. No need to finally talk about this theory and the physicists, for, that's one more need, and thank you for talking to me, but you're going to stay in the supramental level now. Okay. And what is it after my resume?
A little bit of history with contact. It's funny because we realize one thing, it's that contact or double, it has the same age as us. We'll say it has the same age as us in proportion. That is to say that if it has from Samian, we may be 2 years old. It's the same proportion. That is to say that we won't be able to have to speak with contact until we get the same age as him. That is to say, we have the same reason, we have the same interference as him. For example, if you encounter your contact under a form of whatever it is, if you are immature, if you are not very well at the same time, let's say, but on risk of meeting a contact that is rather a child, rather another he, the same reactions as him, That is to say that you will have either the fact of rejecting or the fact of jostling or tearing apart everything that has been written, everything that has been done. It's just the contact effect of contact. And it's a bit like when we vibratory and that we ourselves propelled into a future. And it's quite funny because as we grow up in a certain form of consciousness, we realize that our thought becomes more structured and contact becomes more intelligent and more structured too. It's a bit like if and like they understand our language better, they send us our language better, and they give much more interpretable words and interpretable vibrations than before. So we have words entirely. Impression, we can have perceptions, how to say, sensory, whether visual or smelly, or, and these are means even sometimes that can give some contact, and to say that if you grow, you will have a great contact.
Okay, thanks, Jane. Well, thanks to Christophe. Oh, yes, no.
A little detail to illustrate this is that at some point, as Christian told me, I also had someone who was constantly beside me, and I had the feeling that it was rather really me, well, so being.
We separated, and I know that there are a lot of people who have been against what I was saying, but the individual who arrived afterwards was rather a great, which is more authoritarian, more. Let's say I regretted the person who was next to me, who was and so that's what allows me to tell you that the contact doesn't grow, but we're the ones who grow either. There you go. Thank you. There. I try to do.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. I prefer a remark for supramental beginners. Well, thanks to Christian, we dive directly into what
Some come from what is called contact. So that's also a concept of supramental. Okay. And maybe I wanted to summarize. Say, here are the thoughts that come from what is called contact. There are other words, other people call it another name. That's it. Well, basically, it's the thoughts that are called the intuition. That is to say that the intuitions that happen to us, because there it is precisely, everyone finally agrees on the fact that, yes, intuition is mine, who is thought of, I have an intuition that happens to me in these waters. Well, the supramental says that intuitions come from this contact. And, well, in what we try to do in supramental, it is to have a bond increasingly fluid with this contact. That's therefore part of the thoughts that come to us, but it's not the only one, because even if Jean told him thoughts are not polarized, we're the ones who polarize them. These are not, there are others other than person, entity, which also sends us advice. I don't know if anyone wants to add something.
So there, I told him, yeah, it's true that it went very quickly on the double contact and all that, indeed. So I also thought back to finding the theme again, you know, that you have for thought. So indeed, everyone has an evolution with different progresses. And well, if we ever do it for the history of thought, so indeed, with this term of intuition that we can perhaps change, finally, everyone would put the word they want, but it's true that we try to use a fairly simple word. But it's true that with what you said, it made me think, yeah, intuition, so basically thought that falls into the pocket. So that's what Jean-Luc also said without polarity and all that. And so a thought that falls into the pocket directly. So there, I'm not looking for more in the sense that, in fact, I had, if I can afford, if I can have fun calling it like a mystery, I will see it in time and hours, since it means that like that, when we evolve, we discover things that were mysteries before and that become daily. So in fact, my maximum, I am there, and after that, well, maybe I lost the film, but that's it. Well, I don't ask myself any more questions than that, but I hear in any case, since obviously we've all listened to things that are a bit similar, and that's it. And I know I'm not hooking up on it, but on the other hand, it's true that when it becomes concrete, if ever it would make me like Christian or Jean-Luc feel a presence in that, it's true that I don't feel a presence next to me. But in any case, it's good to have it in let's say in things heard like that. Well, it will allow us to be reassured. If I end up with a presence next to me and otherwise, well, I can add, well, a little something that I liked anyway. So in a book, indeed, well, always dialogue with the invisible on a page. I don't remember which page, but it was in the beginning. What I liked was that it somewhat matches the theme of contact that was addressed there. And the thought, well, by the way, what I liked is that thinking, therefore, it's written, but there you go, I don't cling to it. But in any case, that alone amazed me, but it had opened up a little more. Our thoughts, therefore, served contact, so was called a systemic entity. And like me, well, I often talk about fractals, and so I see myself on a scale of a certain fractal, so I don't know the scale, but I can understand that the larger systems and therefore receive thought on a larger scale. Well, that leaves me with good room for improvement. That's all I tell myself. So I do my job. When I say work, if I do my life, I do my business. And then, in fact, when there will be a widening of the field of trust, I will see that. And certainly words that are used tonight will resonate with me at that moment. That's where I am. But otherwise, it's true that I understand all these concepts. There you go. I could say that where I am personally, okay, thank you. Well, there you go. I have two things to say. First, it's that, well, the account we talked about, well, we find another word. It's a thought adjuster. We find it in How Much Montreal Profit. We sell, even if at some point in a conference, he said, well, contact is your thought adjuster. So there, we talked about contact for 30 minutes. And well, the ones who are used to listening to Bernard de Montreal, they can replace word contact with thought adjuster. Even if, sorry, Jean-Luc, it's not quite that, but let's say that for the residents of regulars of Bernard Montreal, well, everything we said that we know is, well, we could perhaps, well, at that point, I might find it when Bernard de Montreal says, well, just thought. And the second point is in relation to what Christian said. He says, well, there are three techniques. Well, there are three types of thoughts, three techniques to then get stopped. Well, I use the first technique and it works. That is to say that
both for thoughts. So, well, they're not polarized, but there are still rather positive thoughts or rather negative thoughts. I say stop. I say that is to say that, well, it also works for positive thoughts. That is to say that, well, there I am on a project and then I have a lot of ideas coming up at high speed and following one another. And at some point, I can't follow anymore. And I say stop, and it stops at the same time. So that's still rather something positive to accompany the action. And at other times, it makes negative thoughts. Well, I did this, I shouldn't have, and so on. If it starts going around, well, yes, but it's because I'm not like that. I'm not like that. There I say stop. And it stops too. So for your Christian, well, listen, I use the first technique and it doesn't work. That's what I wanted to say. I think that Jean-Luc, you wanted to, I feel like you wanted to intervene there. So if you want there, I have difficulty in understanding the mechanism of the reaction. Why are you fighting against thoughts? Because, well, I think that
I don't have much thought that comes from knife to disturb me or anything. There's another disruption in there. But what I wanted to say was regarding, you're going to tell me that I'm a bit. The contact is not there for information. It is not there for, it is only there for information and the adjustment of thinking. It is there for training and not so much for information. Why? Because if you have some axes that always push you to do the same thing, to be that without automatically being, without thinking automatically being, but simply a movement, you ask them to say what it is. You ask them what it is. Like question said, you ask exactly where this girl is, where this pressure comes from, and he's going to why he's there, why he's doing this, and he's going to help you determine and explain exactly the information that he has to do for you so that you will evolve. If you wonder about the same question on the contact, first, he's going to tell you it's not my business. It's they're going to express himself in a genre. There's something else to do. Well, it's a bit like if you had a person who several decades, and the other, which is constantly next to you to adjust precisely to bring certain thoughts that have just moved or that are interesting for you and that have led you to listen to what I thought about. And as long as you haven't understood certain thoughts, he'll bring them back to you. He'll bring them back to you 2, 3, 4 days, 10 days, 20 days, until you've seized why it's done. At that point, you won't hear it anymore. It's what we called it thought adjustment. And then as your evolution becomes cleaned, you are, we have the feeling that merges with contact, and that both of them, it may be exactly the same thing, but there is one that is dichotomized, that is separated, that is there to watch over you, and the other that is there to watch over the direction. That's what I wanted to say, to make a little digression towards what I wanted to say. Yes. Okay. Yes, it is. I took a shortcut by saying that the adjuster is to think it was double. Well, it's more. But I have the impression that when Bernard de Montréal spoke more
of thought justice, but it seems to me that it's double that he was talking about. I don't know, because he did
to have rubbed shoulders with it. He had no, it's him who directed thought, it's him who directed what he wanted to do. And so there was no one who could play it. He was no longer there to be adjusted. So did his adjuster merge with his DACT, which is possible, which for him would give and from a single contact, or with two people separate, or two separate names, let's say, and what wouldn't be
without being negative, because he merged in a few years, he integrated in a few months. So we have the possibility of doing it over several years. So maybe we can see the distinction of the way in which it is.
So I commented on what beginners say. There you go. Jean-Luc says, well, opera, we're going to merge something like that. So indeed, for beginners, well, once we know that thoughts come from elsewhere, once we know that, well, there is double and thought management that informs us, shapes us. Well, finally, the goal of the individuals is to merge with Jean-Luc. I hope I'm wrong. To merge with his double, but you publish what you say. No, but that's because you're the one who talked about fusion. No, but fusion is, if you like, my idea is that these shows must serve people who don't know supramental, as well as people who and so when we raise new notions, well, I point them out a little because we give a very brief explanation, but after that, it surely deserves a whole show on the subject.
We can say that when we have a question and we ask it on contact, we expect an answer. And when we merge, when we become more and more merged with contact, it's because he who asks the question, it's us who give the answer. Because at the time, we can't know if someone gave the answer or someone gave the question. So there are no more questions and answers. We know that at a stage, we no longer need this separation from this differentiation between the one who asks the question and the one who is answered. Okay, thank you, Jean-Luc. No, the 8:58 p.m. So
someone else to add for a minute to people like that to help maybe, because indeed, yes, with the popularization that you want to do, Jean-Claude,
there are several things, and indeed what you have to do is, as you said, for those who would start, if we can say it like that, of course, it's tricky to find the term super precise, but that's it. It's doing cherry picking, using everything that has been said. Indeed, there are several to put it simply, because it's not easy around quantifying things, but there you go, several progressions, several vintages, as I like to say, of progression. So in fact, we have to see what resonates with us in each indeed, because it's true that we were directly on a story of contact and terms like that, just thoughts, whereas at the beginning it was the thought from where it came from, and indeed it immediately brings back to other terrain, immediately, quite quickly. It's yeah. But in any case, if there are questions, Jean-Claude, because indeed everyone said something, maybe there will be questions of clarification that people might be interested in clarification. And so there, maybe we'll talk about it again, maybe to re-inject them for next year. Then precisely that, thanks, Richard. It gives me the opportunity to talk about the Facebook group, because in fact, okay, there is a YouTube channel that you may be watching live or in replay, but there is also a Facebook group that is planned for all this kind of discussion. That is to say, both that
it is a new concept, but I ask questions. I discuss with people who years of experience in the environment, or even among experienced people, you see that it was to know exactly the differences between double and thought adjustment. It's not that obvious and so on. So I'm covering.
Vraiment terminer sur l'histoire du mot fusion. Si on devait if we had to France, how to say it, if we had to change the word to make it less could we use the word collaboration instead? I'm speaking to everyone here. Well, collaboration, that is to say, collaboration between the different stakeholders, let's say, that we've been alluding to for a while now, where adjustment, adjuster, and so on. These words would have a meaning, let's say equivalent, while being much more accessible.
Different, collaboration is these two people. We collaborate with someone. They are two different people. Is the word fusion be like the word mix? It would also be perhaps more proficient. It's where we can't have a distinction afterwards. That's the operation. Cooperation is always different. Yeah. Yes, but there's still the notion that before there are intelligences, and after merging, there's only one left. Okay. Let's go to call that the second. There you go. Yes. But anyway, it's ourselves, since, as Christian used to say, before we weren't, and one is to break into, and there, the one will come back. Very good. Thank you all. So listen, see you next week. We haven't set the subject yet, but it won't be long. And thank you. So thank you to everyone, and see you next week.